coming to you from the Empathy Clinic here in Oakville, Canada. Now, I've been asked today to speak about empathy. So, empathy is a very, very important topic to me. I'm a psychiatrist. Most of my work is talking to people, usually individuals, but also couples. And when I work with individuals, the hard thing to do, not just to listen to their story, is to try and appreciate their story as a therapist or as a psychiatrist. So I do prescribe a little bit of medications occasionally, but most of my interest is in helping people with their story. The way I look at it, empathy is the capacity to experience the experience of another person from their point of view, not your point of view. Empathy has nothing to do with shoes, and it's all about the soul. So, how and when does empathy start? I think that empathy starts when we're very, very young. So if we're starting out with a baby, a child will have to bond with their mother and the father and begin to grow up and experience their world around them. In order to be able to empathize, they'd have to be able to consider, that is mentally and emotionally, the experience of those around them. This is really not psychologically possible till children reach about the ages of 4 or 5 and then maybe by 6. This is why kids really can't play soccer with each other. They play soccer in the vicinity of each other. To be able to play meaningfully with another person, you have to be able to conceive of the other person's position, intention, what they're going to do next, what you're going to do next, and it gets very complicated. So that's why empathy is particularly important. So why do we have empathy? I think that empathy is an important tool to bring us together. If we didn't have empathy, we wouldn't need to come together to share emotions, to share intentions, to share ideas, and to help each other. It's really important to be able to understand what is the feeling state of another person, especially if you're attempting to help them. If you don't know what they're experiencing, you can't help them. Now, there's different types of empathy, and we're not going to be able to talk about them all today. Let's just focus it in on the kind of empathy that leads to kindness. So when someone is noticing somebody else, and they can empathize with that person's situation, they may experience compassion. And compassion is a warm feeling that allows that person to feel either upset or concerned or worried or hopeful about the other person. That then can lead to kindness. And kindness is an action. It may be words, it may be a physical action, but it's an action towards that other person that is kind. Now, I know that some of you are thinking, well, isn't that sympathy? No. Sympathy occurs when we have the same feeling or similar feelings as somebody else. So if I'm sympathizing with you, I have an experience that is like your experience, and when I mention that to you, we might agree that the experience was similar for each other. That is not the same as empathy. Empathy and sympathy might coincide incidentally, but empathy really occurs when you put your own feelings aside and investigate that of the other person. Can we learn empathy? I absolutely think we can. It's a little bit like a wine tasting course where initially you might not be able to taste too much in your glass, and at the end of the course you can suddenly smell and taste things you've never been able to sense before. And that's because you're sensing, looking to see how much more can you learn about the experience of the other person. So let me give you a little example. What do you think the purpose of tears and blood is? I think that when we have tears, I call it the quintessential psychosomatic moment. It means that the tear is expressing a feeling. In this case, that feeling could be excitement, anger, pain, or sadness. But the tear, it's not that the person has onions or something in their eye. The tear is actually trying to communicate a feeling to somebody else. And if that other person is watching, noticing, they might notice a welling in the eye and a tear falling. Now, one of the reasons we invented sunglasses is to be able to cover up that emotion so that people cannot see our tears. And what about blood? If you see someone bleeding, you say, "You're bleeding." And that's an alarm system to us because somebody else's blood causes either shock worry or anxiety or alarm so that we can attend to that person's wound quickly and efficiently and properly. So let's just try an empathy test. Now look at this picture. In this picture, you have 3 animals. You have one cat behind the glass door, staring at this mouse on the floor who looks quite alone at this moment. And you have the cat in front who's examining that cat. Now the empathy test I'd like you to try is see if you can imagine what's happening in the minds or the feeling state of each of those animals you see. What is that cat behind the glass door thinking? What is that cat that's in the room thinking? And what is our mouse thinking? Now, if you can just let that soak in for a few moments, and maybe if you're watching this with a friend, you can compare notes as to what you think is happening. Now I want you to notice what happens when I do this. Now the story has been reframed. What's happened now is the cat behind the door is quarantined. And the cat, now with the mouse, is exposed. And our mouse is a COVID-19 mouse. Now that kind of changes the story completely. Now I'm not sure if your story has changed at all since we looked at the first picture. But now we're in the second picture. It might be really helpful and instructive to see what changed for you. What? He's here? Sorry, but we have to take a little station break. I think we can have an interview. Very special guest is coming up. So it turns out that Mr. Mouse is actually coming to the studio to give us his first-hand account on what happened that fateful day with the cats. And I think, yep, here he comes. Hello, Mr. Mouse. Hello. So what happened to you on that day when you were confronted by those 2 mouse? Oh, it was a bit scary, actually. I was just making my way along, you know, and I saw the cat right next to me, and he didn't know I had COVID, you see. I had the COVID. And I do have a bit of trouble with my smell, and I don't find that cheese is a... No, can't smell it, you see. So, anyway, hopefully that gets a bit better. Well, can we just get back to the story, please, about the cats? Right, yeah, all right. So I was running along, and I was getting a bit worried about the cats, you see, because they didn't know I had the COVID, and I just didn't want to hurt them, you see. And so I just made my way along as quick as I could, and everything was fine after that, I think. And I don't think anyone was hurt by it, but I'm all right now, and thank you very much for asking. Well, Mr. Mouse, it was interesting to get your point of view. And I guess we don't normally get the sense of empathy, because today we're talking about empathy, and that means that we're interested in how you felt during the experience, as opposed to what we think you felt, because it could be very confusing for the audience, and perhaps even frightening in that first video, because they might have been a bit scared for you. Yeah, well, I can see that they might have been scared, but I'm fine. Bye. Well, thank you very much for Mr. Mouse's helpful description of his perspective of what he was experiencing during that traumatic event. And that's the point that we're trying to achieve, is what is the actual experience of the other person, not what we think they're going through or what we thought they're going through, or what assumptions we have about their experience. The moment we start to negate our assumptions, begin to inquire firsthand, preferably, as to the experience of another, in this case a mouse, then we can get the experience from that person's point of view. That's when empathy starts. Now I'd like to move on to another type of empathy that I call directional empathy. And this means being aware of your space and being aware of somebody else's space. Now during the pandemic, of course, we've had to be hugely aware of our physical distance from each other. And it's just interesting to watch how confusing that can be for some people. Some people are aware, some other people are not so aware, so they need to be reminded, hopefully in a gentle way. Ever see those birds flying around in the air, preparing for their big flight down south? You see this huge ball of birds. There may be a few thousand birds in that group. You see the same thing with birds on a pond. Now, when those birds are flying around in that shape, they seem to change direction almost instantaneously. And I've often wondered, and remember, this is not a circle of balls, this is a sphere. So there's birds that are in the middle of that sphere who have no idea what direction that sphere is going to go in a moment's notice. We also have wind happening against that ball and flapping wings. It's noisy. And so just think about it. It's a very complex situation. We see the same thing with schools of fish underwater, but let's stick with the birds. So how does that guy know that that guy is going left or right? Or up or down, because there's another dimension as well. And they don't seem to bump into each other. Birds bang into objects that we put there that are not natural, like windows and mirrors, and they often get banged on the head and they go a bit unconscious. But when they're in their own formation, you never see them banging into each other. They kind of have a sense of empathy about how they move. Now, I've come up with a game that I think might make this much more obvious to people who are trying to learn directional empathy. Now, the game is called the beanbag game, and there's 4 levels. And the way you play it is you tie a piece of parcel string around your waist. About 4 feet away, you attach that string to your partner's waist. Across from you, about 8 feet away, is another couple with exactly the same issue. They're tied to each other by a piece of parcel string. That means that it can break fairly easily. Now, level 1 would be where they have one beanbag, so one person has a beanbag, and they would toss it across to their competitors on the other side. They would catch it and throw it back. Level 2 would be where you have 2 beanbags. Now, this goes all the way up to level 4, which means that each person in that small group has a beanbag and they're throwing it back and forth, and the goal is to catch it. To keep score, it would be the person who can catch the most number of beanbags without breaking their tie to their partner. So think about that. If you're throwing the beanbag and you're catching it, especially when you're up with those higher levels, if your partner's going this way and you're going that way, you're going to break that knot. However, if you choose to go with them, you might have to sacrifice your beanbag so they can catch theirs, then you're going to stay in the game. So imagine if you had a number of couples trying that. You could sort out very, very quickly who has directional empathy and who doesn't. And I think that would be an interesting exercise to practice or play, of course safely. Don't want anyone to get hurt doing this. But that would give you a strong sense if the directional empathy in your relationship is working for you. So why is directional empathy important at all? Well, it's a metaphor. The way that we go in our relationships, we want our partners to be able to go with us. Not all the time, but generally. Marriage, for example, is a long-term commitment to be with someone forever. And when we meet people when we're young, there's so many permutations of movement that happen while we're going through our lives. And those permutations could be job changes, financial changes, domestic responsibilities, having and raising children, buying property, buying cars. All those things impinge on each other in that relationship. And if that relationship is changing and the direction is changing, then if you're able to be aware empathically of your partner, then that can help you maintain your relationship even better. What's one of the commonest things that people say about a marriage that hasn't worked? Well, probably communication skills is number 1. But the other thing people say is, we just drifted apart. We've all heard that. Why do people drift apart? I think one of the reasons is that they don't have directional empathy for each other. And if they do have directional empathy for each other, then that would make their relationship much more resilient and stronger and more loving, more capable of dealing with those shifts that can sometimes happen in a relationship. Now, what I'm saying also applies to the workplace. Imagine if you have a team working in the workplace. They could play the beanbag game too. You would find very quickly people in the workplace who have directional empathy and ones who don't. Now, the good thing about this game and the good thing about empathy is that we can all improve our empathy. We can improve our empathy skills with our feelings, which we'll talk about in a few moments, but we can also improve our empathy skills with the direction that we're going. So for the final stages of this presentation on empathy, I think it's important to differentiate narcissism from empathy. And I kind of see them as opposite ends of a similar spectrum. Empathy is when we have to negate ourselves to be able to understand the perspective of another person. If somebody is narcissistic, they can't negate themselves at all because their egocentricity, which means their sense of themselves, fills them up. There's no room to be able to take in the experience of another person. So someone who's vain or narcissistic or always puts himself above other people and puts other people down in order to feel superior over other people, that's narcissism. So typically people who are narcissistic lack empathy. But let's just move on. So in relationships, especially in marriage and couple relationships, but this could apply to the workplace, when people are empathic with each other, it actually calms down their emotions. But you might be thinking, well, if people are emotional with each other and their emotions are increasing, especially if they're angry or frustrated or distressed, that's going to be decreasing their empathy. So the idea is that empathy increases the calmness and emotions decrease the empathy. That's kind of it's complex, but at the same time, if you look at it that way, we can always figure out something to do if we're in a conversation with someone that begins to get a bit heated or agitating or frustrating. The empathic questions will definitely change the tone of the conversation. So imagine if you're in the middle of a fight with someone and you say, wait a minute, I'm not sure if I know exactly how you feel. I'm not exactly sure what you're thinking. I'm not exactly sure how you're experiencing me in this moment right now. Well, imagine if this person was also asking the same questions of you. That would be a game changer as well. So a number of years back, I invented an idea called colorpathy. Colorpathy, in my understanding, is using the simplest emotions that we have since we were children in order to be able to understand the emotions that we have when we're dealing with each other. And I'm going to use just 4 simple emotions: glad, sad, mad, and frad. And frad is afraid. And I also use a color. And the color is going to be green for glad, red for mad, blue for sad, and yellow for afraid. Now imagine if we had a board or an iPad or some kind of way, and we have 2 columns. One column would be the emotions for one person, and the other column of those colors is the emotions for the other person. So this is how the colorpathy would work. Each person would be talking for a moment, and that they would stop after prescribed time, maybe the ring of a bell, and they would ask on this device, what is my partner feeling and what am I feeling? Now they wouldn't show their partner their answer until they both filled out their form. And then when they filled out their form, they would then reveal that to their partner. And what we see when we do that is that sometimes you're going to get it right. But more importantly, sometimes you're going to get it wrong. And when you get it wrong, that's when the inquiring questions can start. How can I understand what you said or what you felt more? And that's when the empathy begins to increase. So if you're lucky and you guess it right, okay, that's great. Maybe you're a naturally empathic couple. But if you get it wrong some of the times, that means there's room to learn and room to grow. What do couples often fight about when they're fighting? You don't know how I feel. You don't know what I'm thinking. Don't tell me how to feel. Don't tell me how to think. And I hear that all the time, especially in my office if I'm working with couples who are on the brink of divorce. So what I do, and again, this might seem a little bit much, but if a couple are actually fighting in front of me, I will stop them from fighting, no matter what they're talking about. This usually works, no matter what they're talking about, and say, okay, we're going to do an exercise, and I call it colorpathy. And interestingly, once I teach them those simple colors and those feelings, then I will start to ask them, what do you think your partner's feeling right now? And what do you think your partner's feeling right now? And once they start thinking about the color of emotion that their partner's feeling, back and forth, it completely changes the tone of what they were talking about originally. And I mean completely. To the point where a couple might go from fighting to going to actually investigating how each other feels, and that, guess what? That brings them closer together. It kind of works about 90-95% of the time. It also changes the tone, because what we said just a few moments back is that empathy decreases when people's emotions are increasing. And if you really want a quick example of that, it's like if you had a headache or a toothache, you're kind of consumed with your pain. That makes you less empathic. Pain makes people less empathic. And it's too complicated to go into this today. But trauma, post-traumatic stress, can also impair someone's capacity to be sensitive to other people. And sometimes when I'm working with clients who have PTSD, I have to reteach them how to be empathic because they've had that taken away from them, because they're so swamped with their own emotion. And that does not mean in any way that they're narcissistic. That's a very different conversation and different diagnosis. Those people are hurting, and pain will decrease someone's capacity to empathize with others. So going back to the color-pathy idea, once a couple learns those 4 colors, and once they learn how to interact with each other using that, they can take that home. And instead of them having a fight about it, they might say, oh, remember we were talking in the office about colors and emotions? Maybe we're doing that right now. And when that happens, the emotion no longer controls the quality of their relationship. Empathy is starting to drive the bus. That means you can stay on the highway, in the right lane, check the blind spot when you need to change lanes, make sure your partner's by your side, helping you with that as well. So when they're doing that, they can navigate their life, their relationship much more effectively. And that means that they're moving, when we talk about directional empathy, they're moving together in synchrony. It doesn't always work, but they can come back together again. And when they have the power of that experience in their relationship, that is a very dynamic tool to maintain the quality of their relationship, the quantity of their relationship, i.e. the length of time that they have it, but more importantly, bringing them together so that 2 people can become not one person, but one unit.